A little girl sheltered two freezing dogs. The next morning, police surrounded her house. Snow throttled the Minnesota night, grinding across the pines and flinging white fists against the cabin's glass. 6-year-old Emma Hayes pressed her mitten to the frosted window, breath fogging a trembling circle. Red and blue strobes pulsed through the storm, painting her face in panicked flashes while engines idled nearby like beasts. Blizzard and lightning, two German shepherds still wet with melting ice, stood at her knees, hackles lifted. A low rumble threading the room. Behind them the wood stove hissed, throwing orange heat that couldn't chase the cold. Emma. Her father, Dr. David Hayes, caught her shoulders and tugged her from the glass as a loudspeaker cracked the blizzard. "This is the police. Come out with your hands visible." Snow powdered his hair and the cuff of his flannel from the last step outside. Emma heard boots crunching, radios spitting, a door thudding under fists. The dogs pivoted, noses slicing the air, bodies angling between her and the entryway. A shadow crossed the hallway mirror like a stain slipping over silver, there and gone, wrong in a way the wind couldn't explain. Lightning growled, blizzard answered, the sound vibrating through Emma's ribs like distant thunder. David flicked off the lamp, plunging the room into a dim flicker of sirens and firelight, then knelt until his face matched her height. "Stay behind me," he whispered, voice thin with frost and fear. Glass ticked in darkness. Snow hissed under the sill. The megaphone boomed again, closer, urgent, words shredding on the gale. Emma clutched the locket at her throat, feeling its cold bite. Beyond the window, light swam through veils of white, hemming the cabin into a cage of color. Somewhere inside, that shadow shifted once more. How did saving two freezing dogs lead to this? What happened next will shock you. 24 hours earlier, Pine Hollow Lane slept under a clean white hush, a narrow ribbon through furs bent by winter's weight. Inside, 6-year-old Emma Hayes traced the brass rim of her mother's locket, until warmth from her thumb chased the metal's chill. She breathed on the oval, drew a tiny heart in the fog, and listened to the kitchen rhythm behind her, kettle tick, cupboard thud, zipper rasp, keys chime. Her father, Dr. David Hayes, moved with careful economy, a trauma surgeon turning breakfast into protocol, mug, thermos, badge, gloves, one step flowing into the next, as if the house were a quiet ward that needed gentle hands. He knelt so his eyes met hers. "I'll be back by dinner, Em," he promised, though a crease sat deep between his brows. "Mrs. Evans will stay until I return." Outside looked calm, feathery flakes, branches stitched with lace. Yet the forecast on his phone drew a colder truth, a front sliding across the prairie like a slow wall. Boots scraped the porch. Miss Clara Evans entered in a swirl of wool and peppermint, cheeks bright from the air, white hair tucked beneath a knit cap the color of slate. "My, it bites today," she said, stamping snow from her soles. "Good morning, Jellybean." Emma stepped forward and let the neighbor's arms fold around her. Clara smelled of rose soap and cinnamon toast. "We'll make cocoa," she promised. He kissed Emma's hair above the locket and hesitated in the doorway, a man who knew how quickly days could turn. 2 years had passed and stalled since Laura's sedan slid from a county road near a frozen culvert. Reports were written in tidy ink and sent a box of effects home. David folded grief into rounds of triage and chart. Emma learned to press the locket until its seam left a faint crescent on her palm. Clara hummed hymns while tea steamed and the house carried on with rituals that kept emptiness busy. She nodded in the calm way that made neighbors believe fences could hold back storms. He squeezed Emma's shoulder. "Keep your inhaler close, superhero." A smile tried to rise, failed, tried again, then made it. He went, the door throwing a brief rectangle of light across the rug before the wind reclaimed it. Clara settled at the table while Emma fetched colored paper. Hearts, stars, and crooked trees took shape under safety scissors. A library book about foxes who tunneled beneath snow followed. Emma placed her inhaler by the napkin holder, practicing the careful breaths the pediatric nurse had taught in through the nose, hold for 2, slow out like blowing dandelion seeds. Her chest loosened. She asked for another chapter. Clara obliged, then told a soft story about Laura's honey biscuits and the silly rhyme she sang while stirring batter. Emma tucked the sound of that rhyme into the locket's memory. By noon the light shifted, sky thinned to tin. Snow sharpened into slanted needles that sketched diagonal lines across the lane. Clara phoned David with an update and left a message for the county plow office. Their calm voices couldn't soften the wind that tugged at the eaves with a cat's persistence. Emma ate grilled cheese cut into triangles and lined them like stepping stones along the plate's rim. Clara laughed, turned up the heat 2 degrees and set more logs by the stove. Crackle answered, a human sound inside the weather that preferred quiet. Emma drew a road, then replaced it with birds when Clara suggested robins for spring. Afternoon shortened the world. The porch light that usually showed a neighbor's glow a dozen pines away now floated without company, a lone coin suspended in white. David texted, emergencies stacking, home after 8, if the interstate held. Clara answered with reassurance and hid her ache behind a joke about marshmallow reinforcements. Emma pretended not to notice the way the older woman massaged a knee that protested storm. The kettle breathed, marshmallows bobbed, radio warnings stacked, jackknifed semis closures north of the river, secondary roads at risk. Emma built a little fort of napkins around the inhaler and looped the locket chain through a paper ring to keep it from swinging. Clara praised the solution. Shadows lengthened early, laying bars across the carpet like piano keys. The mantel clock tolled 5, then 6. Wind found a higher register, a steady roar with teeth. The cabin's frame groaned as if old timber remembered other winters and wished to skip one. Clara called her son about a pickup before the roads closed. The sky delivered thick flakes driven sideways by gusts that sandblasted the porch. The stove's window threw amber onto the rug. Emma yawned. Clara considered letting the girl sleep on the couch, then stuck to the rhythm. They brushed teeth to the tap of sleet. Emma coughed, sipped, breathed with care, then tucked under a quilt, while Clara settled with knitting in the rocking chair. Yarn spilled from a skein that matched her cap. Through the wall, storm music sharpened, ice skittering over shingles and scraping along siding like rice cast against a door too hard. At 7:30 a text, last call for travel before secondary routes closed. Clara hesitated, then stroked Emma's hair and whispered, I'll be back by 9. She left a note, set the inhaler on the nightstand, placed the baby monitor receiver near the chair with volume high, and shoveled a path to her son's truck. The door latched, wind filled the absence. Emma stirred and settled. The house sounded larger immediately, each creak magnified. Ducks breathed bravely, the refrigerator clicked, a shutter tapped once and stilled, minutes stretched. Emma rolled toward the window and woke into gauze. The nearest spruce bowed under a crown twice its height. Somewhere, a heavy branch surrendered with a muffled thud. She pressed the locket to her nose, searching for lilac lotion. Laura favored in spring and finding only metal and memory. A wheeze gathered low, a hint more than a problem. She found the inhaler by touch, shook, sealed her lips around the spacer, and breathed medicine that warmed her chest. Outside, wind bullied the eaves, sank, then rallied harder, behaving like a crowd pushing through a narrow door. Emma pulled aside the curtain and understood isolation the way you know night by its feel. No neighboring light bled through, no tracks remained, only whirling white, glittering where the porch lamp stitched a shrinking circle. The cabin groaned again, not unhappy, simply stubborn. She returned to bed, and listened for Clara's knitting needles and found only the soft clunk of expanding logs in the stove. The baby monitor murmured a hush. Emma whispered a promise to the locket anyway, a plan to tell Mommy about fox tunnels and marshmallow islands when dreams allowed a meeting. The promise steadied her. Snow kept falling in confident silence. Near 8, a Kai failure rolled across the grid. The lamp flickered, buzzed, surrendered. Darkness poured in, immediately sliced by the stove's orange heartbeat and the porch's halo going dim. The furnace folded into stillness. Emma counted to 20, calm on purpose. Power blinked back, then died again. She remembered the flashlight in the kitchen and the battery candles in the hall. Slippers found, locket held. She crossed the room by glow and memory, checked the window, and watched flakes plaster the glass like applause. Clara's return seemed far away, as if roads had lengthened by losing their edge. A howl rose, not animal, not machine, only air wrapping itself around corners with perfect aim. Emma tucked the inhaler into her pocket, lifted her chin, and rehearsed the breaths once more. She wasn't alone, not entire. Her mother's laugh, Clara's hymns, David's breakfast promises, each worked like a match struck against a drafty night. She climbed back under the quilts and warmed the locket against her skin. Beyond the walls, pine crowns bowed in unison. Elaine vanished. The cabin set back from town and friends and any quick help stood centered within a roaring whiteness that wanted everything quiet. Emma listened until her breathing smoothed. She closed her eyes and let sturdiness arrive from small things, a brass oval, a steady stove, a promise to wait for morning, even if morning took its time. Wind battered the cabin as if the blizzard had grown hands. Emma lay awake with Laura's locket warm beneath her chin, counting careful breaths the nurse taught her. When a soft scrape threaded through the roar, she held still. Another came, longer, along the front door's lower seam, followed by a muffled whine that sounded like need wrapped in frost. Emma slid from the quilts, tucked her inhaler into her pocket, and tiptoed across the rug. Clara had sworn by rules, never open to strangers, never invite the unknown, but the sound kept returning, patient and pleading. She lifted the chain an inch and peered through the peephole. The porch light carved a thin halo through white. Two shapes pressed into that circle, breathing steam that plumed. A dark muzzle lifted toward the lens, eyes bright despite ice on lashes. Another head nudged close, turning to shield the first from a violent burst of sleet. German shepherds big stood side by side like partners at a post. One held up a paw, fur crusted with ice. The other planted like a shield between wind and companion. Emma remembered a sunlit photo of Laura holding a wobbly-eared puppy, while summer exploded with green, and she felt a quick ache that had nothing to do with air. She unlatched the door. Cold barged in, slapped cheeks, bit fingers. The dogs didn't surge. They stepped back in unison, recognizing thresholds. Emma opened wider, and motioned small and calm. "It's okay," she whispered. The pair crossed without shaking, snow everywhere, paws placed with care as though the room were fragile. She threw the bolt, stuffed a towel along the sill, and drew the chain. The larger dog moved to the entry, and surveyed windows with steady, professional focus. The limping one lowered its head, curled the injured leg, then sat, gaze steady on Emma. She crouched, palm out. The sentinel sniffed, exhaled warm air and touched nose to skin. The injured companion followed, trembling with exhaustion rather than fear. "Food?" she asked. She warmed chicken from dinner and set a bowl by the stove. Neither lunged. The sentinel positioned slightly behind the other, eyes flicking between Emma and the dish, as if seeking permission. When she nodded, both ate in measured turns, each pausing to allow space. Emma fetched the first aid kit, dragged it to the hearth, and opened the latches. Alcohol, gauze, tape, tweezers, antiseptic spray, a small tube of antibiotic gel. Her hands hovered, then chose with care. "I'll help," she said. She patted the quilt. The injured dog offered its leg and set its paw upon folded fabric with surprising gentleness. Ice had packed around a shallow cut near the pad, and clung in clumps along the joint. Emma dabbed warm water until the crystals melted and the skin showed pink. The dog winced, but held steady. The sentinel faced the door, spine straight, ears turning to sounds outside, muzzle angled, measuring distances. "Have you ever felt compelled to help, even when it broke the rules?" she whispered, half to herself, letting the thought hang like a lantern. She dried the wound, swabbed with alcohol, and counted to 3 the way nurses did, then blew on the sting. A low rumble stirred in the injured chest, not warning but gratitude shaped like thunder from far away. She checked between toes for grit and found only ice dust. The paw flexed once. She wrapped gauze, snug yet kind, fingers remembering Clara's touch. "Names," she said softly, "because belonging begins there." She looked at the window's white rage, then at the stove's glow. "Blizzard," she told the injured one, "because courage can live under snow." "Lightning," she told the sentinel, "because stillness can hide speed." Ears flicked as if the words landed and took root. Lightning walked the room's perimeter without nosing the trash or couch, then sat beside the window, head tilted, tracking something behind the storm. Blizzard tested the wrap with a careful step, gave a small whine, then settled as the bandage helped. Emma checked her pocket, shook the inhaler, and took a measured breath to keep the rhythm smooth. The house felt smaller, yet less alone. Heat licked the rug's edge. Snow punished siding and sang in the stovepipe. Lightning lifted a paw and pressed the baseboard, then touched another spot as though counting. Not strays, she thought, trained. She pointed 2 fingers toward the kitchen. Lightning's eyes followed, then returned to the window, until she added a soft come. The dog obeyed on the first word, and sat to her left with exact placement, shoulder to knee, alert without tension. Blizzard drank, then returned to the quilt without bumping the kit, and when Emma lifted the tape roll, the bandaged paw presented itself as if volunteering for review. Someone had taught them. She pictured a handler's vest, a whistle, a badge, maybe a bark that meant go, or stay. Wind thickened, the grid faltered, lights dipped, then steadied. Lightning turned head left, right left again in even beats, then exhaled a hushed huff like clear. Emma tried Clara's phone and found no signal. She wished for the neighbor's knitting and peppermint words, then straightened because wishing didn't open roads. She set fresh water, gathered the empty dish, and added a log to the fire. The dogs waited until she stepped back before moving, respecting boundaries that nobody had explained aloud. When the house creaked, Lightning tensed, then relaxed only after the sound repeated harmlessly. Far off, a plow droned. Blizzard blinked slowly, sleep tugging, yet sat upright as if duty outranked comfort. Emma ran a palm along warm fur and felt an even heartbeat. "Somebody is missing you," she said. She pictured posters curling on a bulletin board, a handler checking shadows, a radio repeating call signs across frozen miles. Her chest tightened, not with wheeze but with the ache that attends missing. She remembered the afternoon the yard gate swung, the puppy bolted toward drifting leaves, and no promise could pull her back. Autumn swallowed sound, now Blizzard's trust steadied her hand. Lightning made a small click with teeth, as though suggesting keep watch. Emma checked the curtains and saw her reflection stitched into the orange glow. A small girl, 2 guardians, a room holding steady against the weather that wanted everything silent. She spoke to Laura through the locket, describing the scratch at the door, the rush of cold, the careful pause, the names that felt exactly right. It soothed the hush between gusts. Lightning shifted, placed a paw lightly across Blizzard's shoulders, then looked at Emma. The gesture felt like a briefing, partner recovering, perimeter secure. She laughed once, a tiny sound that loosened fear. She smoothed fur above the wrap, fingers traveling a familiar path without thinking, and crossed a patch where hair thinned into a pale crest. It lay where a clumsy tumble from the porch had marked a puppy the summer before Laura's last drive, a scar the vet traced with a gloved fingertip, while Emma fed treats and promised better steps tomorrow. Heat surged through her at the touch of that memory. The room shrank to bandage, breath, heartbeat, and the bright spark that leaps when loss meets recognition. Blizzard wasn't only a courageous traveler, Blizzard might be star. Hope burned bright. Wind gnawed at the cabin until the rafters answered with a weary groan, and then a different sound slid in under the storm, a metallic tap at the back door, single, deliberate, wrong. Lightning's ears cut toward the kitchen, body aligning like an arrow. Blizzard rose despite the bandaged paw and flowed between Emma and the hallway with grave purpose. Another tap followed, then the faint scrape of metal against metal as though a thin blade studied the lock. Emma's mouth dried. She remembered Clara's steadfast list: never open, never approach, call for help, and still the noise kept testing the seam like a question she could not ignore. Lightning moved first, not with panic but with a measured glide, shoulders low, nose high, exhaling a tight puff that said danger without sound. The stove ticked as wood settled. Sleet hissed across the siding like sand. A knob shivered. The deadbolt trembled. Somewhere under the house, the wind found a hollow and howled through it, shaping the note of something hungry. Emma reached for her inhaler by reflex and touched only the quilt. She had left it on the coffee table beside the picture book. A thin wheeze gathered and retreated, a small tide in her chest. Blizzard looked back, eyes steady, then returned focus to the corridor, body blocking, presence calm, a living wall. The knob turned half a breath farther, a tool. Lightning exploded once into a deep, disciplined bark that punched through the blizzard like a flare, then sank into silence, listening. Glass chattered in its frame. Emma forced herself to move. She slid along the wall until the phone lifted into her hand, thumb already dialing 3 numbers she knew like a rhyme. The call connected to a voice layered with static. 911. What is your? A crack sounded near the hinge. Cabin on Pine Hollow Lane, back door. Someone's trying. Lightning's body shifted, pointing toward the mudroom window. A shadow crossed the frosted pane and vanished. Is anyone with you? The operator asked. I'm 6, Emma said too quickly, then corrected because she had learned precision from David's careful mornings. I am 6. I'm alone. My neighbor went home. My dad is at the hospital. The storm is back. She coughed and felt the wheeze return, feathering edges that wanted to become knives. Are you safe? 2 dogs are here, Emma said, voice thready, hope steadying it. They're helping. The operator's tone cooled into kindness wrapped in method. Stay away from the door. Officers are en route. Keep the line open. Can you secure yourself in a room? Movement whispered against the back steps, almost a shuffle, then wood creaked with a weight testing angles. Blizzard rumbled low and controlled, the exact length of warning a partner might give. The wheeze sharpened. Emma tasted copper panic and tried a slow inhale through her nose, counting the way the pediatric nurse taught, but cold air scratched her lungs and flipped the rhythm wrong. My inhaler, she whispered, looking at the table across the room. She took 2 steps and the room tilted, not from faintness but from dread, expanding every sound until even the clock became a hammer. Lightning saw her falter, nudged her leg with a gentle insistence, then sprang to the table, paws stopping short of the wood, muzzle sweeping the surface with precise restraint. The gray spacer clacked against the phone cord. Lightning nosed it until it slid to the edge, then pinched the mouthpiece with careful teeth, carried it to Emma and lifted it into her hands, as if the room had practiced this exchange daily. She shook, sealed, breathed medicine that warmed a path down to air-starved branches. The operator kept talking softly, counting with her, timing the hold, reminding her to exhale like dandelion seeds drifting over a summer yard. The wheeze retreated a notch. The lock cried again, metal complaining under stress. Officers are coming. The voice promised. Move to a secure space if you can. Lightning angled toward the hall. Blizzard touched Emma's knee with a brief press, then guided her with a shoulder as if turning a teammate through a doorway. The cabin exhaled a new sound, then a small pop, a silence, a deeper silence, and the lights died. The stove kept its orange heartbeat, but lamps surrendered. The refrigerator clicked into absence. The furnace folded. Darkness pooled, barely cut by sirens that did not exist yet, replaced instead by wind and a hum that belonged to no appliance. The phone hissed and went dead. Emma froze. The sudden quiet from the line felt bigger than the storm. Power gone, she whispered to herself, because words can hold shape when shadows want to erase them. Lightning returned to the kitchen threshold and lifted his head at a new sound from the mudroom window, a thin whine of tempering glass under stress. A tiny tinkle not shattering yet, a prelude. Blizzard leaned into Emma's legs, guiding her toward the basement door at the end of the hall. She understood their purpose the way you understand warmth after cold. You don't reason it, you feel it. She opened the door. Cold, dusty air rolled up. Wooden steps dropped into a concrete box where canned peaches waited with a toolbox and a folded cot. Lightning descended first, paws finding edges without noise, then turned to watch. Blizzard followed Emma, eyes never leaving the hallway. Footfalls brushed the porch at the rear, not heavy like a sprint, not light like an animal, but careful, measured, withdrawing a little, then returning as if mapping the space beyond the frame. Emma reached the bottom, and pulled the string that woke a dim bulb, just as the last reserve of backbone in the wires above gave up and the bulb failed with a sad blink. The basement remained a gray suggestion. The stove upstairs ticked and its warmth sank as a gentle breath through the vent. Blizzard settled where the stairs met the floor, facing up, body a shield. Lightning moved along the wall, nosed the utility shelf, then placed himself at a slight angle that gave both the steps and the small basement window to his view. Emma slipped behind stacked boxes of winter clothes and camping gear, tucked the phone into her pocket, though it was silent, and hugged the locket under her chin. Her breathing evened, but she still asked questions. Above, something finally gave. A pane cracked with a spidering sound, then a small rainfall of shards pattered across tile, each piece hitting with the cruel tinkle of light turned sharp. The basement window breathed a draft that smelled of pine, oil and a damp wool coat. Lightning's tail froze, Blizzard's ears tipped forward. The intruder did not speak, did not stumble, did not rush. Footsteps retreated down the back steps and paused, then returned slower as though comparing options. A hinge whispered near the mudroom. Emma heard the scrape of a glove across a counter, a dull thud where something soft landed, then a careful retraction toward the porch again. The dogs refused to break formation. They did not chase, they held. The storm pounded the siding harder, thrilled that it could help. Emma closed her eyes and pictured Clara's hand steadying a teacup, David's badge catching morning light, Laura flipping a biscuit, and laughing when flour feathered her cheek. What would you do to protect someone you love? She thought, the question settling like a pledge inside a chest that had only just found its rhythm. Wind climbed into the stovepipe and sang a longer note. A boot scuffed away from the door. Another step followed, scraping the crust of ice on the porch. Then silence, which did not comfort because silence, during a storm, can mean listening. Lightning gathered itself and released one more contained bark, a message sent through wood and weather. Not easy, not welcome. The scrape receded into the yard, became a thump on the stairs, turned into nothing, returned as a faint crunch along the drifted path, circled to the side where the cabin met trees, then faded again. The house felt wider yet somehow contained by two bodies holding it together at the seam. Emma counted breaths until her hands loosened. The phone flickered back to a ghost of a connection for a heartbeat, then failed. She swallowed fear because fear could not make a road plot. She checked the inhaler, placed it on an upturned crate within reach, and tried to make herself smaller behind the boxes without losing sight of Blizzard's profile, steady as stone. Above, a loose shutter tapped 3 times and fell still. Snow slithered off the porch roof in a wet slide. The intruder's steps did not return. That made everything worse because the unknown likes to stand just beyond hearing, shaping imagination into sharper blades than any knife. Lightning crept 2 paces to the vent and sniffed air dropping from the room where the pane had cracked. He sneezed once, not from dust but from chemical scent, a bite of oil, a slice of cold metal rubbed with a cloth. Blizzard answered with a growl so low Emma felt it through the floor rather than heard it. Minutes stretched thin. She pictured squad cars grinding across drifts, blue and red fighting the white around bends. She pictured officers leaning into gusts, hands at belts, radios trying to punch through static, boots making lawful noise on steps where secret feet had just withdrawn. The basement's concrete smell steadied her, the locket warmed against skin. Lightning rotated back to position, and lifted a paw to rest lightly on the first stair, a reminder that they would climb when she did, not before. Blizzard held the bottom like a lock itself. Overhead something small knocked once, maybe a branch, maybe a glove hitting a knob while somebody decided whether to push luck. The knock did not repeat. Wind took the conversation again and kept. Emma waited for engines or a voice, and while she waited she realized safety sometimes sounds like 2 animals breathing at perfect intervals while a winter night tries every door and finds none that open. The darkness, the cracked glass, the retreating scuffs, each fed a picture she could not finish. She tucked the inhaler closer, clutched the locket and let the question inside settle into courage shaped like patience. Pine Hollow Lane emerged in hushed silver as morning pressed against the storm's bruised edge. Cruisers settled around the cabin until red and blue turned the windows into slow twisting ribbons. In the basement Emma roused when Lightning lifted his head and Blizzard shifted his bandaged paw, both listening to a firm knock above. A loudspeaker cut the cold with her father's name, then a second voice, nearer and calmer, asked occupants to respond. Emma gripped Laura's locket, gathered the inhaler and followed the dogs up the steps. Lightning took the landing first. Blizzard pressed along her leg, a steadying wall. Through the sidelight she saw parkas and open hands and a man breaking past a deputy with desperation that outran protocol. Emma, David's breath smoked as he leaned to the glass. She cracked the chain and opened to a slap of cold. He pulled her close, checked for bruises with the careful speed of a surgeon, and then noticed the glitter of glass under the mudroom window. On the mat lay a black tactical glove, rubberized over the knuckles, damp with melted frost. A uniformed officer slipped it into a bag while another photographed tool marks along the deadbolt. Someone probed this lock but quit, the officer said. Lightning and Blizzard swept the rooms with quiet precision, noses sifting air near the cracked pane, bodies returning to place between Emma and the hall. A tall man with frost in his beard stepped inside, stopped when the dogs turned toward him and softened his posture. "Officer James Carter, County K-9, he said. "Where did you come across these two?" Emma told him about scratching, the door, the food, the bandage, and their patients. "We know them," he breathed. Blitz and Leo, call signs for blizzard and lightning, went missing during an operation 2 nights ago when comms failed and weather swallowed tracks. David straightened. "Operation Undercover trafficking case," Carter answered. "They were assigned to Detective Robert Klein's task force. A van cut us off near the interchange, then storm chaos. Lightning sat like a statue at roll call. Blizzard lifted, set, and lifted the wrapped paw." Emma stroked Blizzard's collar and felt a rigid seam tucked under the buckle. She traced it and found a weatherproof capsule clipped flat to the leather. "There's something here," she said. Carter approached sideways, hands visible, and eased back the flap only when both dogs relaxed a fraction. A tiny USB drive glinted inside. He slid on nitrile gloves, removed the capsule, and sealed the device in an evidence pouch. "Chain of custody begins," he said. 2 plainclothes men entered behind a sergeant. One wore a wool overcoat and a practiced smile. "Detective Robert Klein," he announced, flashing a badge. The dogs stiffened. Lightning's lips rose a millimeter. Blizzard's chest expanded, rumble contained but unmistakable. Klein slowed without retreating. "Appreciate your quick call," he told David. "If that drive holds operational footage, we need it now." Carter didn't move. "You'll get it through the lab," he said. "First, we secure this scene." A tech bagged the glove. Another dusted scratches at the lock. A deputy followed a narrow tread angling away from the porch toward trees. Klein's smile creased while his eyes tracked the path. Lightning stepped to block his path before he took a second stride. Carter laid a quiet palm near Lightning's shoulder without touching fur. "Reading the room," he murmured. David edged Emma behind him and watched Klein the way he watches a monitor that flickers. The tech logged the pouch, had a witness sign the tag, and carried it outside under a sergeant's escort. "Of course," Klein said. "Same goal." Carter turned to Emma with gentleness. "You did everything right," he said. "Call shelter." She wanted fear to end, yet the kitchen held more clues than comfort. Under the sideboard, the tech slid out a second glove, matched to the first. A chip of glass lodged in its seam. Klein examined the starburst in the pane. "Could be opportunists," he suggested. "Storm brings scavenger." Lightning's ears twitched at his tone. Blizzard planted the injured paw and didn't blink. Inside, the living room became an improvised field office. David warmed Emma's hands between his. She told Carter about the night in careful fragments. Klein hovered at the doorway, close enough to see, far enough to avoid touching. His scent carried a clean solvent note that didn't belong to wool or snow. Blizzard's hackles rose a hair. Carter noticed and continued. "These two are trained to hold, not lunge." When they stiffen like that, something's off." Emma reached for Blizzard's neck and found the thin pale crescent scar again. Star tugged at memory, bright and aching, but the room wouldn't let that thought finish. Klein shifted, and both dogs leaned into the movement before anyone else reacted. Lightning's eyes flattened. Blizzard's shoulders squared. Emma's locket thudded softly against her throat. "We'll transport them once the vet clears that wrap," Carter said. "I want prints pulled from the glove and counter. Trackers can sweep the tray line when the wind drops." Klein nodded, then angled a fraction toward Emma. "You were brave," he said, smiling again. "Thank you for protecting our partner." The gratitude sounded right. Something beneath it felt too smooth, like ice hiding thin water. Emma stepped back until Blizzard's flank touched her knee. The evidence team finished its circuit. Notes closed, tags aligned, photos archived. The mobile unit's fan changed pitch as data ingestion began. Carter clipped a temporary lead to Lightning's collar and another to Blizzard's, testing acceptance with a soft command. They yielded, disciplined and wary, eyes never leaving Klein. "We'll meet the vet at headquarters," Carter told David. "After evaluation, I'll brief you on what we learned from the drive." David thanked him. He tugged Emma's hat lower and kissed her head. She looked at both dogs and then at Klein, who watched the collars like a man measuring distance to a prize. Outside, deputies tracked footprints that curved and ended in wind-scoured blanks. A sergeant held a photo of the tread beside the bagged glove and nodded. "Same make," she said. Carter guided the group toward the door. Lightning paused at the threshold, looked back at Emma, and touched his nose lightly to her knuckles before stepping into the snow. Blizzard followed, bandage clean, gaze steady. Emma's chest tightened in a way that wasn't as. She whispered, "Good dogs," and tucked the locket under her scarf. Klein remained a moment longer, gaze sweeping the room as if memorizing angles. "We'll be in touch," he said pleasantly. The dogs answered with silence that felt louder than any bark. When the door shut and generator noise replaced wind, David knelt and mapped the night-broken glass, tactical gloves, trained guardians, a hidden drive, an officer who felt safe, and a detective whose smile didn't thaw the room. Emma watched cruisers idling through the window's frost and pressed fingers to the scar under Blizzard's collar in her mind. If Blizzard were Star, then why did Carter call him Blitz, and why did Lightning's eyes turn to stone when Klein entered? The storm had named them one way, the badges another, and the truth stood somewhere between, wearing colors she couldn't yet read. By late afternoon the storm thinned to brittle brightness when Detective Robert Klein returned with a knock that sounded courteous and wrong. Officer James Carter stood by the table with forms and an evidence pouch. David poured coffee he would not drink, and Emma touched the locket at her throat while Blizzard and Lightning held still as statues facing the hallway. Klein stepped inside and spoke in a soft official cadence about follow-up and welfare checks, then let his gaze slide toward the back door where the pane had cracked. Lightning's ears pricked, Blizzard's shoulders rose a fraction, bandaged paw planted with stubborn grace. "I wanted to thank the girl," Klein said, taking 1-2 silent steps, and then faster than the coffee could cool he lunged, seized Emma's forearm and dragged her close, turning his body so that his shoulders shielded his waistband. Carter's radio came up, David's mug hit tile and burst. Blizzard hit Klein's wrist with controlled force that bent the bone without shattering it, while Lightning slipped behind the knees and bumped, toppling balance without chaos. The pistol at Klein's belt flashed and vanished. Lightning had lifted it by the slide and held it sideways in his jaws, muzzle pointed away, trigger guard untouched. Klein wrenched free with a twist that spoke of training and caught Emma again with the opposite hand, dragging her toward the side door. "Open it," he barked, voice turned to iron. "Now." Carter did not move. "Release the child," he said, field calm. Blizzard, hold. Lightning, stay. The dogs froze into purpose, ready but tethered to command. David kept his hands visible, voice steady as rib spreaders in an OR. "Let her go." Klein pressed an elbow against Emma's collarbone and smiled in a way that did not reach his eye. "Brother," he said softly, as if delivering a private joke. David blinked, misheard, then heard it correctly as the room's temperature fell. "What did you call me, brother?" Klein repeated, letting the mask slip. The voice under the badge was older, more bitter, unmistakable. "Did you really think a tidy funeral and a flag fixed the problem you refused to see?" David's mouth formed a name that dust had buried. "Thomas." Emma's knees bent. The word turned a stranger into a ghost with teeth. Officer Carter flinched a hair, recognition cracking through procedure. "Detective Klein." "A uniform," Thomas Hayes said. "Cartel money buys uniforms and a fire buys a legend." Blizzard edged left to open Carter's lane. Lightning lifted the captured pistol higher, teeth precise, eyes never leaving Thomas's hand. "Have you ever faced a betrayal that changed everything?" David asked, not theatrically, but because the bedrock under his life had just rolled. Thomas leaned, bringing Emma up as a human shield. "Share that in a seminar, doctor. Laura learned first." Air left the kitchen. "Don't," David said, color gone. Thomas tasted the power and pushed harder. "She didn't skid by chance. I put her in that ditch. She begged for you between coughs and the culvert sang like a throat. I wanted you to hear what late sounds like when the man who saves strangers can't save home." The sentence scraped every surface. Emma's fingers found the locket. Blizzard had touched her leg with a quick reassurance. Carter's voice came tight and clear. "Confession captured," he told the radio, never blinking, never blocking a dog's vector. "Thomas, release her now." Thomas tried another angle toward the door, misjudged Lightning's timing, and reached for the pistol he no longer possessed. Lightning sprang, braced forepaws on Thomas's hip, and in the same motion scraped the magazine against the coffee table so that even if the frame was snatched back it could not fire. Blizzard regripped the wrist that held Emma, added pressure, and forced the hand open with surgical exact. Emma dropped and rolled beneath the table. David slid across the tile, gathered her and turned, body a shield. Carter stepped in, heel sliding over porcelain, and drove Thomas to the wall with 2 short commands that rode on the dog's thunder. Thomas slashed for an ankle blade. Lightning knocked the elbow offline while Blizzard's shoulder slammed him flat. Carter trapped the free arm. David kicked the knife away, and steel cuffs ratcheted tight. Robert Klein, also known as Thomas Hayes, you are under arrest, Carter said, reciting rights while Blizzard stood over Emma and breathed steadily to teach calm, and Lightning set the disabled pistol at Carter's boot like a gift given by a partner. Thomas laughed through his teeth. Brace yourself, brother, blood remembers. David's grip on Emma did not loosen. Choices remember, he answered. Deputies burst through the porch, snow gusting around their boots, and took hold of Thomas's shoulder. He rolled his neck and spoke past Carter as if the officer were furniture. Make sure the drive doesn't lose that segment where saints do overtime while families drown. Carter ignored the hook. Walk, he said. Thomas twisted for a final look at Emma and smiled a ruinous smile. Your mother's laugh sounded like glass bells, he said. I made them stop. David's face tightened in a way that told of pain that would take years to name. Enough. They hauled Thomas toward the threshold. Blizzard and Lightning followed to the frame and halted on Carter's palm. Outside, light slashed across the snow. Thomas planted his feet, turned, and called through the wind that had found a voice again. Grief made you a better surgeon and a hollow father. That ditch did the real work. Carter shut the door on the words and leaned against it a second, as if pressure could keep poison out. David sank to the rug with Emma and counted breaths until his own war stopped galloping. Blizzard pressed against Emma's side. Lightning set his head on her knee and closed his eyes without sleeping. The kitchen looked like a diagram of a fight. Broken porcelain, a scuffed baseboard, a table shifted 2 inches, prints in powder, a magazine without its partner, a collar hair snagged on a doorknob where a hold had broken at exactly the right sec. Carter crouched and gathered the orphaned parts, voice gentled by plain promise. We have the confession, we have the weapon, we have the gloves, we have the drive, he said. He will not talk his way free. David nodded once, not trusting speech. Emma touched the locket and finally asked, very small, is he really Uncle Thomas? David closed his eyes. He was, he said. Now he's a stranger in cuffs. Carter spoke into the radio, voice steady again. Suspect in custody, alias confirmed through prints. Transport requested. Victim advocate on standby, scene secure. He straightened and glanced at the dogs. Your partners kept everyone breathing, he told them. And then to Emma, they're staying until we move you. Blizzard nuzzled Emma's wrist, and she stroked the pale crescent under fur, the scar that tied hope to a puppy named Star while the world insisted on calling him Blizzard. Sirens wound down outside, boots crunched, a door slammed, the porch shook under. Through the window's frost, the lane glowed with cruiser light and the cold reflection of a day that had learned too much. Thomas shouted something, wind chewed it to ribbons. David lifted Emma, stood and met Carter's eyes. We'll follow the car, he said. I'm not letting him out of my sight. All right, Carter replied, but ride with us, not behind him. He checked the bandage on Blizzard's paw with a quick practiced look. Field wraps holding. Vet will recheck. Lightning angled back to the hallway and stared at the basement door as if memory needed a witness, then returned to sit between Emma and the room where the pane had cracked. He waited for this house, David said, to no one in particular. He studied our and misjudged your family, Carter answered. Emma breathed with Lightning's rhythm and whispered, you saved me, into Blizzard's fur. Outside, chains clinked, tires found grip, radios crackled logistics and clipped phrases that pretended feelings did not exist. Inside, the stove ticked as it cooled, the clock remembered to move again, and the locket warmed under a small hand that had held dread and kept it from winning. In the quiet after chains and engines, grief uncoiled like a wire. Father and daughter sat between 2 dogs and understood that victory could cut, that truth had a price, and that love would have to hold center of a life cracked by a brother's ruin. At Northridge General Hospital, the corridors hummed with wheels and winter boots. Yet inside a pediatric lounge chair, Emma Hayes curled beneath a quilt while Mrs. Clara Evans held her hand and whispered peppermint soft comfort, and across the doorway, Blizzard and Lightning lay sphinx-still beside Officer James Carter, 2 steady silhouettes that made passing nurses smile. Despite the night, David paced the window with a surgeon's rigid calm, turning toward every radio crackle as if he could triage grief itself, then followed Carter to the affiliated vet clinic tucked beside the ER, where Dr. Anika Rao greeted the dogs at their level, palms open, voice low, gaze respectful, and asked Emma for the story while she examined Blizzard's bandaged paw, praising the clean field wrap, irrigating the shallow cut, checking tendon glide and heat, and adding a padded boot that earned a thankful lean from the patient. Lightning posted by the door, tracking every footfall with professional restraint, yet tipping his head whenever Emma's breath hitched, and soon the room filled with small normal things, paper towels, a stainless bowl, a soft beep from the scale that made Terror's edges less sharp. Then Rao passed a microchip wand over Blizzard's shoulder blade, first revealing a standard canine registry, and beneath it, nested at a slightly different frequency, a second encrypted tag tucked near the collarbone, something not typical for municipal dogs. And when a clinic tech routed the auxiliary data through a secured reader, the laptop screen opened a folder labeled Pine Saw. Inside it, short audio files with dates that matched the months before Laura died. Carter set chain of custody forms on the counter, broke the seal on a sterile drive, started a mirrored copy and nodded for Rao to play one clip, and Laura's voice, steady and unadorned, filled the space. "If this reaches you, Thomas is using storms and accidents as code," he said. "Ditches forget," and he laughed. "If I'm late tonight, check the bend by the culvert and trust Star if he returns without me," after which, another recording followed with a shiver of porch wind and Laura again, quieter but iron strong. "He promised a showy rescue you would miss by minutes, and he wants you to feel small. I'm hiding what I can on Star's collar and with Carter's friend because paper burns but a dog finds home." David braced both hands on the counter, eyes closing like a door against a surge. No scalpel could relieve, and Clara wrapped Emma closer while Carter's training unspooled in method mirror the files. Seal originals, timestamp custody, notify the flag premeditation and intimidation because procedure was how truth survived. Emma stroked Blizzard's throat, and found the pale crescent scar she knew from summer, and the name she had dared to hope settled without doubt. Star Rao confirmed with adoption records dispatch had pulled from a shelter database, male shepherd pup, crescent mark beneath the throat, placed with the Hayes family 2 summers ago. Then wrote Blizzard aka identification verified into the chart, and when Emma whispered Star, the dog pressed his weight into her shin as if to say yes, here, never lost again. Lightning stepped forward and set his chin on her knee and her breath even to his rhythm, calming a shaking terrier across the room, whose owner mouthed thank you through tears, proof that steadiness travels. David returned to the screen because he needed exactness more than mercy, and listened to Laura timestamp a threat about brake lines and the word ditch spoken like an assignment, and learned through unarguable syllables that his wife did not die by chance, but by a brother's cruelty dressed in weather, and the knowledge cut him open and stitched him stronger in the same motion. Clara, seeing the change, fetched cocoa and told Emma that brave hearts rest better with warm hands, and Emma fed Lightning a single marshmallow with the gravity of a ceremony, then held Star's booted paw and promised walks on a dry lane when spring remembered the path. Carter stepped into the hall to call federal partner, returned with updates. Thomas transferred to secure holding, joint task force looped in, the USB from Star's collar already surfacing account, trails and shipment dates that matched Laura's whispered notes, and David, who had spent years using reason as armor, felt resolve stand up inside him like a person and take his coat, and he told Carter to take whatever the case required while he made the house safe, changed locks, replaced glass, installed light, and taught Emma that monsters can be defeated by daylight and dogs and people who do not run. Rao finished the rewrap, recorded vitals, and cleared both dogs to remain in the clinic room tonight so Emma could sit beside them until they slept, which she did, telling Star the story of the fort made of napkins around her inhaler and the foxes that tunneled under snow, and Lightning breathed in time with her sentences as though pacing an unseen metronome. David crouched to eye level and said her courage and the dog's training saved lives, and touched the locket and added that Laura's voice had saved them too because love plans ahead when danger pretends to be chance. Clara, who had already drafted a plan the storm would respect, promised soup, fresh bread, and a barricade of neighbors who would not blink at shit. She kissed Emma's hair and told her that resting is a brave task after a long night. When the clinic quieted, monitors dim, mops whispering down the hall, the vending machine humming like a snowdrift, the vet returned with vaccine paperwork and a soft towel for Lightning's head, and Emma curled her fingers into his fur until his eyelids fell, and even then he kept one ear cocked toward the door, partner to the end. David signed statements in an alcove, broke down the night into a chain that would hold in court, and on his way back paused at the glass where mist-haloed parking lot lamps, a faint weather mercy after rage, and he let himself imagine Pine Hollow Lane under thaw, a girl skipping across new grass while Star trotted dignified with a healed paw, lightning shadowing them both like a valiant brother. Grief still moved inside him, a live wire, and yet resolve braided with it, and when Carter asked if he was ready to go over the recordings again for precise timelines, he answered yes, because facts were the road out. Emma, drowsy, pressed her forehead to Star and whispered, "Home soon," and lightning nudged David's wrist as if assigning a mission. David accepted it aloud. Protect Emma, keep family close, pry every secret from Thomas and anyone who paid him, rebuild what could be rebuilt. And when he finally Star shifted his weight so Emma could use him as a pillow, and lightning stationed himself between father and door as though he had sworn an oath. Outside, snow softened to a glittering fog that made the hospital lights look like lanterns hung for travelers, and in love arranged chairs and blankets and evidence and vows into a shape that could carry mourning, and the family, bent but unbroken, began the work of turning surviving into living again. The safe house crouched behind a shuttered nursery at the end of a plow-scarred cul-de-sac. Clapboard painted a hopeful yellow that wind could not dim, and inside David checked the reinforced latches one more time while Clara set lemon tea on a low table and smoothed a fresh quilt across the sofa. Emma laid 2 bowls beside the rug for Blizzard and Lightning, then stroked Star's padded boot with careful pride as Lightning completed a silent circuit of corners before parking between father and daughter like a living shield. And for a breath the room felt ordinary, a place where stories end with cocoa and sleep, until a knock touched the rear door with polite certainty that did not belong. Lightning rose in a clean line. Blizzard levered up with calm resolve. Clara's eyes flicked toward Emma. David lifted a hand for stillness, and the knock turned to a soft scrape of metal on metal that spoke fluent lockwork. So David moved Emma into the hallway alcove behind a heavy bookcase while Clara stood by a brass floor lamp with its cloth shade tilted like a halo. The kettle whispered, the house waited, and the latch flexed. The door opened a hand's width, then wider, and Detective Robert Klein stepped in without snow on his shoulders. A man who had not fought the wind to reach them. Lightning stiffened while Blizzard's chest gathered a quiet growl until Klein's voice found a familiar acid that outlived a borrowed name. The voice of Thomas Hayes, who had rehearsed grief like theater and sharpened winter to a blade. And he scanned the angles, counted glanced at the phone, noted the kettle, saw small shoes near the rug, and smiled as if a puzzle had clicked. David kept his palms visible and said the simple truth that mattered, "Release my daughter and Leah." Thomas tilted his head and answered with a soft derision that carried years of rancor, then shucked the borrowed politeness, cut toward the alcove. Regan yanked Emma into view with a twist that made Lightning flash forward and Blizzard strike the wrist that held her with measured force that bent bone without breaking flesh, and in the same breath, Lightning took the pistol from Thomas's waistband by the slot, carried it sideways with the trigger guard untouched, and clamped down until metal turned useless while Blizzard pressed Emma back behind the bookcase and held the gap. And Thomas tried to pivot toward the kitchen for leverage, but Clara moved with the steady nerve of a life spent keeping home strong, stepped behind him without a tremor, lifted the lamp by its neck, and clipped the crown of his skull with the ceramic edge in a blow that surprised him as much as it hurt. Then lifted again and struck the shoulder so the second impact drove him forward into Blizzard's set body and Lightning's planted stance. The floor rang. The pistol skittered under a chair. Emma ducked low and scuttled to David, who wrapped her and kept his face level, and in the ringing quiet Thomas wheeled, eyes bright with fury and humiliation, showed a folding blade and lunged, but Lightning bumped the elbow offline with a short brutal nudge while Blizzard met the charging hit, toppled, balance, and pinned the forearm to the boards with a foreleg while David kicked the knife toward the stove, and Clara, breath even, set down the lamp and snapped the chain on the rear door just as heavy boots hit the porch and Officer James Carter's voice cut the wind with commands that left no room for theater. The hallway filled with deputies and radio crackle, cuffs bit, and Thomas laughed through his teeth, throwing barbs about ditches and timing and rescue as if poison could still win the air. Yet Carter read him his rights, bagged the blade, collected the disabled pistol, and sent a pair of uniforms to sweep footprints, while another photographed the lamp's edge and the heel scuff where the lunge failed. and in that settling moment David felt rage and sorrow pull against each other like ropes on a cleat, then chose steadiness because his daughter's breath counted more than vengeance. Thomas lifted his chin and called the surgeon brother again, savoring the word like a dare, admitted what he had already confessed, that Laura's death was homework finished under weather, then smiled at Emma with a ruinous confidence that had dented so many rooms and said saints arrive late when storms provide stage cues, and lightning growled low while Blizzard's ears went forward, and Carter's palm hovered an inch above Lightning's with the quiet pressure handlers used to hold a line. Deputies hauled Thomas toward the door. He turned once more and spat. That grief had made David heroic for strangers and hollow at home, yet the words slid off a circle that would not break. Because Clara stood behind Emma with a hand on a small shoulder, Blizzard leaned into the girl's knees. Lightning planted himself on the threshold, and David said paper plus people beats storms, then closed the door on the taunt and let the porch swallow it. Silence poured back in with the lamp still humming, the kettle now singing, the tea now needed, and Carter stayed to log the scene while technicians dusted the knob and then frowned at a narrow hatch high in a closet and popped it free, revealing a cedar box tucked into the framing where a careless inspection would pass, and the ribbon around the lid was the blue Laura used for birthday letters. So David untied it with fingertips that shook and opened the box to a scent of lilac and saw letters folded into hearts, a pressed sprig, a tiny watercolor of Pine Hollow Lane under spring light, a lock of hair tied with thread, and a second flash drive etched with a little star for the dog who carried secrets through weather, and the top letter became sunlight in his hands as Laura wrote to Emma about songs before sleep and about courage arriving in socks and cocoa and steadfast friends who do not boast. And the next page mapped a trail behind the cabin with marks where wild strawberries hide, and another told Emma that her father loves like mountains, sometimes quiet but always strong, and beneath the pages lay button treasures from a dress and a ticket stub from the first film the parents watched together, and a smaller note addressed to David said, grief may flood but love holds the shoreline if you keep building small piers every day. Emma traced Laura's loops with a fingertip while Blizzard pressed his weight into her shin. Lightning rested his chin on David's knee as if assigning the next mission. Clara poured tea and dabbed at the lamp's dent with a cloth that smelled faintly of lemon, and Carter, satisfied the room told a clean story, holstered his sidearm, relayed transport updates, then asked softly, what small act of courage has changed your life? And Clara answered first without turning it into a speech, saying one steady swing of a lamp at the right time could be a bridge, while David said a child opening a winter door to two shivering partners had turned a whole war, and her cheeks flushed, whispered that holding a locket taught her how to breathe until help arrived. Outside, cruisers idled, radios clicked, chains jingled, the cul-de-sac glowed blue and red against drifts, boots thudded, doors slammed, and the wagon bearing Thomas rolled away into a night that no longer owned the family inside this room. Carter lingered long enough to praise Blizzard's boot and Lightning's restraint, promised to return the letters after certified copies, shook Clara's hand with gratitude that looked like respect, told Emma the partners would nap better if she read them a page, then stepped into the cold and let the latch fall. David lifted the watercolor into a simple frame that had held a print nobody loved, set the cedar box on a shelf he could reach and she could touch, and knelt to meet Emma's eyes to say they would rebuild with locks and light and laughter, and Blizzard thumped his tail once like a seal, Lightning huffed a single approving breath, Clara laughed with relief that sounded like wind chimes remembered in spring, and the safe house felt like a home beginning rather than a hiding place, because love had stacked evidence beside keepsakes and laid a path across wreckage wide enough for 4 feet, 2 hands and 2 faithful dogs to travel together toward morning. Spring returned to Pine Hollow Lane like a soft apology, melting winter's grip until the pines lifted their arms and the brook remembered its song. The cabin stood brighter than memory, new panes catching the sun, fresh hardware shining on the doors David had rehung with slow precision. Emma skipped along a path she and Clara had strewn with pea gravel, trailing a ribbon for Spark, the shepherd pup who bounded after butterflies. Blizzard moved with calm dignity beside her, Scar hidden under a healthy ruff. Lightning paced the perimeter, pausing to taste the wind and check the fence. David set a planter beneath Laura's kitchen window, and pressed soil over rosemary and a single sprig of lilac that Clara had nursed. He breathed in and felt memory arrive without drowning him at last. Full inside, the cedar box sat on a shelf within Emma's reach, letters refolded by small hands that knew each loop. Some mornings began with Coco, a page from Laura and a promise for the day. Other mornings began with leashes and a walk to the meadow, where snow melt made mirrors. Neighbors waved, stopping at the gate to admire Spark or to ask how training progressed under Lightning's patient example. Carter visited on weekends, sometimes with files, sometimes with treats that vanished the moment Spark understood trade. He never arrived without asking Emma's permission to pat Blizzard, and he always thanked Lightning as if addressing a colleague. Trial talk threaded through those visits in careful doses. Thomas sat in County Orange, then State Gray, while the case moved from indictment to testimony to verdict. The USB from Blizzard's collar, the drive from the cedar box, the gloves, the shattered pane, the recorded confession, and the financial logs formed a chain no argument could loosen. Handlers testified about K9 protocol. Rao's notes described microchips. Neighbors placed unfamiliar tracks near the tray line, and a highway camera offered a stuttering glimpse of a sedan idling near the culvert. David sat through it with a spine made of work, hearing Laura's voice without looking at the defense table. When the jury filed back, the room held a silence that remembered Snow, guilty on all counts. The judge spoke evenly, then placed a life sentence on the record like a door closing against the wind. Afterward, David walked into spring light and let air fill places grief had hoarded. At the cabin, life practiced its ordinary. Clara taught Emma to knead bread on Saturday. Spark learned sit, stay, and leave it. Blizzard, now called Star by Emma whenever she needed a secret smile, carried the paper up the path with dignity. On the first warm afternoon they strung a hammock between two pines. Emma climbed in with Spark and a letter that began, "My brave girl, you make daylight." She read aloud to the dogs while David repaired a birdhouse and listened to her voice find music. He thought about the woman who had hidden truth in careful places and left maps where love could find. At night he reread a page that urged patience when storms pretend to be fate. Sleep came easier under that sentence. On a Sunday, Carter arrived with a framed certificate praising civilian courage, a second frame recognizing K9 valor, and a third acknowledging Clara. They posed on the porch while a neighbor snapped photos that put sunlight on healed faces. Emma placed the frames above the mantel next to Laura's watercolor of the lane in June. Emma's lungs steadied with warmer air though the inhaler still lived near the door. She ran longer and learned to count breaths for fun rather than fear. Sometimes she traced the pale crescent beneath Blizzard's fur and whispered "Star," then kissed Lightning's brow and told him he was the brave brother who found the path. Spark answered with a squeak toy and an apology for chewing on David's bootlace. Evenings brought stories on the steps while frogs began their choir. Clara described the county fair. Carter told clean versions of rescues that ended well. David shared small victories from the trauma. They spoke Laura's name often and without ceremony. Emma asked questions no longer shaped like knives. Answers arrived in pieces that fit. One clear morning, David took the trail past the culvert, stopping at the bend where ice had once pretended to be a road. He stood with Lightning on one side and Blizzard on the other, while Spark flopped in wet grass. He thanked the woman who had planted messages in a dog, the officer who listened, the neighbor who swung a lamp, and the child who opened a door because compassion outran rule. He promised the lane that he would not be late again. Back at the cabin, the porch became a small classroom. Emma taught Spark to offer a paw gently, to ignore sandwiches and to wait until a bowl touched the floor. Lightning demonstrated a crisp down. Blizzard practiced a careful retreat. David handled paperwork for a therapy certification course. Carter recommended, dreaming of visits where children met steady eyes and learned how courage can breathe beside them. He drafted a letter to the hospital foundation proposing a program named for Laura, focused on family support when tragedy fractures ordinary days. Clara proofread and cried once when no one looked. Mail returned with approval and a grant that would place counselors in waiting rooms. David framed the letter and set it beside the cedar box. Even the walls seemed to breathe easier. That night the sky turned lavender over black pines, and the brook sang louder. They ate on the porch, shared bread warm from the oven, and introduced Spark to straw. Juice ran. Laughter answered. Lightning sighed like someone finishing a long shift. Blizzard watched fireflies with priestly calm. Emma leaned against David and traced a heart on the railings. She spoke of future rides, summer lakes, and a channel where stories about brave dogs and brave kids could help strangers feel less alone. David, who had once measured days by scans, measured this one by crumbs and giggles and paws thumping at moss. He looked at the rebuilt window and saw not a wound but a frame. He thought about storms, about ditches, about headlights through snow, and then about a small hand on a latch because two creatures begged for warmth. He understood what decision had saved them. Later, after dishes and a moonrise that looked hand-painted, Emma gathered Blizzard, Lightning and Spark in a nest of blankets and asked if they could end with a promise. David knelt, placed a palm over the locket, and said they would keep telling true stories, keep choosing kindness even when fear argued otherwise, and keep building a life that left no door to darkness ajar. Emma smiled, turned to the camera, and recorded an outro for the channel they had started together. She lifted Blizzard's paw, kissed Lightning's nose, scooped Spark, and spoke to the lens with the steadiness spring had taught her. Life's storms can break us, but love rebuilds. Has a small act of kindness like Emma's changed your life? Share your story below. Like and subscribe to join our journey of hope and healing.